And we are live. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight for our September meetup. We are the New Jersey Office 365 user group. I'm your host, Tom Daly. And tonight we have Jared Matfess, an Office Servers and Services MVP. He's also a solution principal at Slalom Consultant in Connecticut. He'll be presenting the definitive guide for when to use what in Office 365. Check out our last meetup, what it's really like migrating to SharePoint Online. In this presentation, Matt Wade shares with us his experience migrating customers from on-prem to online. You don't want to miss August meetup, Real World Use Cases for Power Apps and Flow by Stephanie Donahue, a Microsoft MVP, president and co-founder of the Pate Group. Recordings and slides are available now on the meetup.com site for both presentations. Lastly, if you don't mind, please take a few minutes to go online and rate and review our meetups. Now, on to tonight's featured presentation. Jared, go ahead and take it away.
All right, so I appreciate everyone coming and dialing in for tonight's event. So the definitive guide for when to use what in Office 365. Again, Tom, appreciate the intro. I presented this at the New Jersey Spark a couple of times now, and it's definitely I'm with you, Tom. That location was nice, just a little bit far. Nice, solid 4 hours each way from Hartford, but it was a nice, peaceful drive on the way back home. For those who don't know me, I'm local to the Hartford area. I live there with my wife and my dog. Tom did our logo for the Connecticut SharePoint Users Group. Our logo is the pug, a big dog fan. So you follow me on Instagram and Twitter. There's lots of pictures of my dog. If you want to ask me questions later on, hit me up on @JaredMatfess on Twitter. There's my meetup. There's my email address. Feel free to ask questions. This is kind of a fun topic. I've done this a couple times now, and I think it's one of those topics where there's a lot of people that put out content about when to use what, and I don't ever find it's very helpful. It's kind of like one of those, like they want to sort of say something and usually it depends, and maybe they'll talk about the audience and stuff, but it's never really like use case driven. So for me, I'm a consultant, so I spend a lot of time talking to different people, different industries, all those things, and getting to take a look at how people are actually using these tools, and getting a feel for what's reality versus kind of what's the hype on things like Twitter or at conferences. A lot of times that I've felt before, like I'm always behind the curve, and that all these organizations are just light years ahead of me, and they're just wow, everybody's just working like a network, using the Microsoft lingo. But the reality is that people are people, and the tools are helpful, but they don't again, it's not the be all end all. And it takes a while for folks to change their habits. So I thought this would be a good kind of fun topic to just sort of dig into that. And so realizing that people come into these things at all different levels, I'm going to do just a very quick overview of what Office 365 is. Then I hop into what's the sort of the meat of the presentation, when to use what, some real world use cases. There's some research to back up generational preferences for collaboration. I'll briefly touch on how to drive adoption for these new tools, and then I think at the end I might have some recommended resources to have you go check out. So with that, let me just hop on into it. So you had Matt talk last week, and that's actually a perfect setup. He's the king of infographics, and he put together this sort of periodic table of Office 365, and there's a lot of people that love this table, and there's some folks that don't quite like it. I'm a big fan because it's nice and visual. It helps me think about the different categories of services, file collaboration or email and project management, all that. And so when people see this, they tend to either two reactions. One is like, wow, there's a lot in Office 365, and others go, all right, well, cool. Like, this is a good way for me to sort of kind of figure out what the themes are, right? And it's always fun too, because there's certain things where there's a couple of different options, right? There's the stream and video. I think we've seen that Microsoft isn't always as connected as they try to promote that we should be, right? That they should. Sometimes you'll see of two different product groups coming up with the same product, and because they kind of work in silos. So again, this is just kind of a brief overview of these different services based on your license, based on what you enable within your organization, but these are things that could be available to you within O365. Typical pain that I hear from my clients are, services keep getting added to O365. It's just no matter what you do, they are continuing to release new functionality, new features, and all that. And at times, the roadmap, if you've ever been to the O365 roadmap site, it's overwhelming, right? Changes coming every week. It's hard to pinpoint what's just sort of a break fix versus what's really going to change for your end users. When's a new service going to roll in? And that's not always, there's not always a clear roadmap for that. I think, Teams kind of came out of left field. No one was really expecting that. And in fact, even there was a little, I'm not sure if it was a glitch or what, but I think it was last week or the week before, there was some rebranding of Skype for Business for a few users for a little bit of time where they said that was really now Teams. So, think about you as someone's working at a company. Your job is to manage O365 as a service. Trying to keep up with the pace of change is unlike anything you've probably seen before. It is not that twice a year you get a big service pack that involves some downtime and tons of new features. These guys are rolling that functionality in every single week. And as I've also mentioned too, functionality sometimes is redundant across services. O365 is streaming, two ways to have enterprise video. Skype versus Teams, you can do voice and video conferencing. I think there's 25 different ways to track to-do tasks, right? Between to-do and SharePoint tasks and Outlook tasks and to-do and Planner, right? Lots of ways to track your work. And the other thing that I think is even more frustrating if you're sitting there trying to manage this as a service is, this new concept of the MVP, and I don't mean the Microsoft professionals, but really the minimal viable product. What Microsoft product engineering feels is good enough to actually release out to users to try to have them, leverage the service. And so what I mean by that is there are certain times where things don't feel like they're fully baked. It's just sort of good enough. And, I'm just going to pick on a service. Let's just say Planner, right? And this is not true, but this I'm just using it as an example. When Planner rolls out, it could suck, right? Your initial reaction would be, it's terrible, never going to use it. I don't know what Microsoft's thinking, but the reality is the next 6 weeks they can release new functionality to Planner, which helps make the service more whole. And so that is really the challenge of folks that are sitting in that seat, then it's having to manage O365 as a service, is the fact that things do change quite frequently. You have to constantly evaluate sort of what the state of that service is, and then how it might apply and might be useful to your organization. When I start thinking about the main buckets of collaboration, which I think it really kind of gets into the meat of when to use what, because the way that Microsoft keeps selling O365, it's the productivity cloud or the collaboration cloud. It's different ways for your people within your organization to work together to help complete work, move tasks forward. So as I look at these different buckets, right, there's Office 365 groups, which I get into arguments with people whether or not that's really a service or it's a different view of some existing services, but from a product perspective, it's kind of being viewed as a service or as a bucket at least. There's Yammer, which there's certainly people can argue pros and cons if that's still even relevant today. I think knowing that Ignite is coming up next week, I would expect some pretty good announcements that are going to come out, and then hopefully that we'll see more from the product team about what's coming and what changes there are and what how that might impact your organization, what investments Microsoft's making in that area. There's Skype for Business, which is traditionally used as sort of the instant message presence. People do voice video conferences with that. You can do screen sharing, or you can actually send files throughout Skype for Business. That's another option. There's Teams, right? That's the new kid on the block. It's kind of the Slack competitor, persistent chat. A lot of questions around that since it leverages things like SharePoint in the back end. This being a New Jersey SharePoint user group, I'm assuming that most folks have an idea of what SharePoint is. I've got another slide to cover just in case. And then finally, there's OneDrive for Business. And so, when you sort of dig into the meat of when you use what, these are those main buckets, those main areas where typically I see organizations really struggle with what's the right tool for the job. Just a quick overview of what some of these services are. So O365 groups. A lot of times folks say that these are the new modern team sites, is the way that organized groups of people should execute on projects that they should, go ahead and run within their departments and share files and all that. It gives you quite a bit of functionality, things like calendars and conversations. You can email the group, and people can receive that. It gives you a spot to store your documents. You've got a OneNote for managing, your meeting minutes or action items or any of those type of things that you want to capture as sort of that knowledge for that working group. And then finally, it gives you a planner, which is a way if you wanted to manage your tasks within a project that's being executed. You can then access these groups a couple of different ways. You can go through mail, right? So these groups actually show up within Outlook, either the mobile, the web, or the client. It's got the conversation stream where people can like a particular thread, if that's what you like. And then finally, you can access the group through the site, which is really a SharePoint modern team site. Again, it gives you access to things like documents and planners and all that, right from the UI. That's O365 groups in a sort of a minute and a half nutshell. One of the things that I particularly like about groups is the fact that you can extend them with these things called connectors. And this is no-code customizations. And so what you're able to do is add a connector to an additional service, and allows you to integrate with third-party software as a service platforms, things like Bitbucket, GitHub, Jira. You can pull in an RSS feed to enter content into your conversation stream. You can leverage some of the social features like comments and likes. And so if you look at the screenshot that I got in the top right-hand corner, so we actually had a group set up for building out an intranet site for a client, and our developers were using Bitbucket. And so I was able to see within the conversation stream when they committed code to Bitbucket, when they did a deployment. If I entered in bugs within it, I'd be able to see those enter the conversation stream. We could then take and have further conversation about those bugs within that. We could like it, etc. It allows your project managers or your people that you don't want to have monkeying around in Bitbucket. They can kind of get a pulse of what's happening from within the O365 conversation. And so I think that's a pretty good user experience when your folks, for individuals that sort of need to know but don't need to be in the guts of things. Next, I'm going to hop into Skype for Business. And so, as I think mentioned before, if you haven't seen Skype for Business before, it is, it's a product formerly known as Link. It allows you access to presence awareness, things like, is the person available, busy, are they in a meeting, are they away or online? It's integrated with Exchange, so it's able to pull from your calendar. Also, for myself, I'm in this Skype meeting right now as I'm presenting to everyone, right? It shows that I'm unavailable, do not disturb type thing presenting, so it knows what my status is based on the activities that I'm I'm executing. You can also do voice and video calling. So for this one, Tom's got, it looks like an E5 license, and so it actually provides a dial-in number. For those that don't have the E5, you can do computer-to-computer calls, which really, voice, it's been around for quite a bit, right? But it's just kind of leveraging your microphone to have the conversation with the other person. We've done that from time to time within my company. It works pretty good. I kind of like the Cloud PBX just because it gives folks the ability to dial in if they don't want to have the Skype app on their phone. They can just call the number. Lets you do things like desktop sharing, peer-to-peer. So if I were to say, hey, I'm doing it right now, right? I'm showing you my desktop, showing you off my slides. You can do that with a large group of people. You can do it with one-to-one. You can also share files. And so, if I wanted to send you a screenshot, I send you a PDF, a PowerPoint, whatever, you can do that. It then just, it just ends up in your downloaded area within your downloaded files folder. And then kind of what I think is the real benefit of Skype for Business is the fact that you can schedule your meetings. So, like, for example, Tom put this on my calendar for 6:30 tonight. That way, he scheduled the meeting. I could then get reminders to join that. And that's a pretty good experience for me that's managing my calendar. And then we hop into Teams. Teams is that new chat-based workspace in O365. It's persistent chat. It's a direct competitor with Slack. There are individuals that really appreciate this way of collaborating with each other. In addition to, so this is where the waters get a tiny bit muddy, is when when you provision a team, you actually also get some different services behind the scenes. You get SharePoint, you get a OneNote, you get a planner, place to store your files. So again, that's kind of a little bit on the money side, where you're seeing that functionality exist in other services. It also allows you to do voice and video calling, which again, you're saying, yes, Skype does that. Microsoft Teams also has that capability, which is why it was certainly very interesting a week or so ago when there was a notification that, or a couple of folks had seen within their tenant that Skype was getting rebranded as Teams. And I don't have any insider information. I made the snarky comment on Twitter that sure, that'd be a nice thing to cover during some of the MVP NDA sessions. So I don't have much more info other than that. I'm hoping to see at Ignite next week what's going on, if there's any news beyond that. Teams also has the ability to extend the service and to include connectors to other software as a service platforms. The thing that you can also do with Teams that I really like is the fact that you can build these chatbots. And so it's really, and a chatbot at a very high level is just it's a web application running in Azure, especially if you're sticking with the Microsoft stack, built using the Microsoft bot framework, and it allows you to have a text-based conversation with that web app, and it can take actions based on what you type. So, for example, if I was to say, hey, go schedule a meeting for me, if I built out that functionality within my bot, it could do that. Or, hey, go create a team site for X or Y or Z, it could do that, right? Or, when's the next release of the, if we're doing an Agile project, when's the next release window? When is it? Next Friday, this Friday? Stuff like that. So a lot of cool ways to extend the Teams platform. It also has a web, mobile, and application access to this conversation and all the files and different links that are part of the service. So Yammer, kind of moving on, right? So Yammer is that web-based enterprise social. This is an acquisition Microsoft made a few years back, and it was it's kind of been that redheaded stepchild. We've never seen it really truly integrated with the rest of Office 365. The best you can do right now is you can expose the conversation stream through an iframe. You can pop that in your SharePoint site and kind of see what conversation is happening within that group. It's definitely been, Yammer's been sold as a knowledge management, service or application. Helps to sort of pull out that travel knowledge, crowdsource information from people, and kind of figure out, how to solve, use the power of people to solve problems. It's got the same functionality you see in other sort of social experiences, things like, threaded conversations. You can hashtag stuff and click on that and find out, relevant conversations around that particular topic based on the hashtag. You can do likes because, why wouldn't you go do likes? It's kind of that's the new thing. It's not the new thing, it's the overused thing. From a restrictions and limits perspective, you can, it's a large scale, greater than 1,000 users. This is not an active working team, that you might have with a SharePoint team site or, an O365 group or leveraging Teams. This is larger scale, bigger groups within your organization, maybe even your entire organization. And again, the kind of common theme is it's got a mobile app for on-the-go access, web interface, etc. And you can also get email notifications, which can be annoying, but if you are still living in your inbox, then maybe that's a good way of sort of staying plugged into what's happening. And then just about almost rounding it out, OneDrive for Business, right? I think it's kind of that SharePoint site for you where you manage, your files, allows your users to do sort of ad hoc collaboration. Maybe they're working on a file that's not quite ready for prime time. You can go ahead and quickly share that with your colleagues and give it a special permission level at the file or folder level. It integrates into the Office platform, so you can save from PowerPoint to OneDrive or the different Office products. The thing that I really like is the fact that there's a sync tool, which actually is starting to work now. So you can synchronize your local computer with your OneDrive. And so, for example, I've got like 2 main machines that I use, and so I can flip back and forth between them really with no concern because I'm syncing my files using OneDrive. And so if this computer dies on me, I just go use the other one. It's got everything I need. So I kind of like that. You can also share with users outside your organization. That's a configuration setting that your O365 enterprise admin will need to make. So he or she will need to rule, is this something they want allowed for everybody? Do they want to allow, for all domains or just specific user domains? And so I'm not going to talk about that tonight, but that's just an option if you wanted to, quickly, without having to spin up a full team site or a team or a group or et cetera. Users could share, with people outside the organization if they wanted to from their OneDrive. The thing that I really love, and this is maybe an underrated feature, is the fact that you can actually copy from your OneDrive to an O365 group. And so I could, I could click on one of my, kind of work in process files and move that to the end area when it's prepped and ready to go. So it's kind of a cool thing not everybody knows about. And then to finalize from the core 6 buckets of collaboration in SharePoint. And so I'd hope that in this area, this group, in this setting, that folks have some familiarity with SharePoint and that they're comfortable with what this is. But for those that aren't, so SharePoint is your sort of web collaboration tool. It allows you to share files within a group of named people, or you can open up to a larger group of people. Allows you to do enterprise content management. So what I mean by that is really employee intranets, departmental sites, area portals and stuff like that, where you're either publishing content for large consumption or publishing news. You can have approval processes and etc. The new thing is this is going to be a pretty big thing. I think next week is going to be modern forms of Power Apps. And so I've got on my soapbox before where I talk about the fact that InfoPath is definitely deprecated, but there has not been a suitable replacement from it from Microsoft. Certainly there's many third-party products to help sort of fill that void. I'm sure you guys have heard of K2 and Nintex. Those are a couple of sort of the front runners of third-party technology allows you to create forms. Power Apps is being positioned as the InfoPath replacement that allows you to not only do forms, but you can also build these sort of mini apps that allow you to interact with SharePoint sites or line of business applications that are available, such as things like Salesforce.com or Dynamics 365, or even databases within within Azure. It's kind of going to be the new way of sort of tying a lot of that data together. I've got a whole other soapbox rant about Power Apps, but for tonight, just be aware that that Power Apps is being positioned as how you can extend your forms within SharePoint sites going forward. The other thing too is SharePoint's not dead. It's actually powering a lot of the new services within O365. So for example, O365 Groups has a modern SharePoint team site created as part of it. So that's where all your files are stored in a SharePoint document library. So it's not going anywhere. It's really not changing too much either. It's just the fact that it's being used for other purposes, which is as someone that's been kind of in the SharePoint space for a while, that's a positive thing for me. For an awareness perspective, there still is the concept of classic sites and modern experiences. So classic sites is your typical, it kind of looks like SharePoint. It does, you're able to make a lot of customizations to it. You can, you can brand it, whereas there still is no good pattern for branding these new modern experiences. So we're going to get into that in a little bit later. I've got a good slide that kind of talks about the comparing classic and modern and when you use what. So I know, Tom, do we ever pause for questions, or do I just kind of keep on plugging along? I have no issue continuing to talk to myself. I did want to stop you after you got through these buckets. So if you want to go back a couple slides, we had a question about what are some of the differences between groups and teams. So
it's kind of a tough question to answer, but
yeah. So if I could, I might actually hold that one, because I'm going to start getting into some of the compare and contrast, and I think it'll play out better when I have a slide.
Okay.
But it's a great question, and let me just take a note too. So if for some reason don't get to it, I want to make sure I do, but I'm almost positive. It's been a long day, but I'm pretty sure I got a good groups versus teams. And so let's get into that. All right, I'm going to keep plugging along.
Yeah, keep plugging along. If something comes through, I'll try to stop you at a good, I'm not going to interrupt you too far, but I'll stop you and ask the questions.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds like a plan. Okay. All right. So the top secret when you use what? It's kind of a funny joke, but it depends. So, the reality is that there's going to be no solid silver bullet to address when to use what. It's really the real secret for when to use what is, focus on the business problem, not the technology. Something like Teams is not going to solve all your problems. It's really, at the end of the day, it's the users that have to take advantage of the technology. It's not IT forcing something down the throats of people. That's not going to drive adoption. What you have to do as someone that's either an IT professional or someone that's within an O365 space is to identify the pain points in current processes. It's to go ahead and educate users about O365 and how that might be able to alleviate those pain points. It's not to try to, again, force the technology. Yammer will not solve all problems. In fact, Yammer is one of those interesting services that is poorly adopted many times because it's not really the right fit for the problem that the users are trying to solve, and it actually makes it more complicated. And so really, involving your users into the decision-making process to figure out, what makes sense and what fits within their working group is going to be your area, is kind of the secret sauce for success. Involving them in the solutioning process, demoing capabilities, asking them questions, making them a part of it. And I understand you cannot do that for all your users. That doesn't scale to large organizations. But rolling that out to some of your initial power users and having them provide input and having them be your champions to help say, yeah, you know what? We work with this group. We have this problem. This is what we did to solve it. This is the technology we used. Have them be the ones that help championing moving this forward. That's really is a recipe for success. And the other thing I tell people too is don't be afraid to fail and pivot. If you go ahead and say that you're going to start off with O365 like a group to solve a business problem, and that ends up not fully solving it, you pivot. Maybe you say, all right, well, let's try out Teams. Maybe that'll help work out better. It's not a bad thing to start down a path and it's not the right thing to change, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's about, solving the problems and not just forcing a solution on top of folks. So, and this is where I started to hint that I was going to get to the choosing between. So when I say when to use what, I think this can be at times a pick your poison scenario. So some of the things that you need to ask yourself when you're trying to pick your poison, which service to recommend is, for starters, since Teams is definitely kind of new kid on the block, it's being pushed very heavily by Microsoft. You have to ask yourself, will the team benefit from a persistent chat experience? Right? That's kind of that's a good question to ask in the beginning. You also want to get into how people are going to be accessing the content. Are they remote workers? Are they desk information workers? Are they people that are on their phones? Are they in Outlook all day? Are they mobile? Are they a bit of both? You know your audience, right? A lot of times your audience can also help to drive what solution makes the most sense, because if it's something where they need rapid response, maybe that's, you might lean them towards, leveraging instant message at times, or maybe that persistent chat Teams is good, or, setting up a cadence of having daily Scrum meetings where you set up a recurring 15-minute call with Outlook. I mean, it's understanding the use cases, understanding your users, and then, helping to align those to problems. The other thing too is, who are the people that are participating? Generationally, who are they? Are they millennials? Are they folks that have 30 plus years of experience with the company? How quickly do they adopt it to change? What are their preferences, and what business functions do they serve? Obviously IT tends to adopt technology quickly. Finance is somewhere in between. Marketing maybe wants the new stuff but doesn't always like to kind of the pain of doing it the right way. So you gotta understand definitely who is going to be using this technology, as well as how active will that collaboration be. And that's, is it real time, is asynchronous? Could you post a message out on a Yammer group and then it's okay that get a response back for a day or two? You gotta definitely understand those questions to figure out what tools make sense for that business purpose. And the other thing I want to highlight too is sometimes, again, it could be the user interface. So this is an example of the fact that when you create a team, you actually get a group, and you actually get a SharePoint site. And so in the top left-hand corner, that is the SharePoint modern team site that gets created. On the right-hand side, that's the conversational view of your O365 group. And then that actually also relates to, there's a team set up for technology enablement. So there's a SharePoint site collection that gets created. There's a team that's able to have that persistent chat thread, and it's how your users are going to interact with that bucket, that area of collaboration. And I know this doesn't quite answer that question that got brought up, but I think I got a little bit further that might be able to help. Maybe not this one, but I think it's a little bit further in. Actually, you know what? Let me keep going, and then I'll pop back if I have to. I actually, before I go to O365 groups versus Teams, I do think that Skype versus Teams is really is a good one to use one. So on the left, Skype Business. This is, I think, from my opinion, this is where you should schedule your meetings, your activities. This is where you have multiple participants that are taking part in this. If you're using it, I would say Skype's better when you have needing a dial-in, especially if you have the E5. It's very good at ad hoc presence and messaging for users not directly involved in project work. So what I mean by that is, in most organizations that I work with, that roll out something like E3, everybody, 1,000 people get it. And when you roll out Skype for Business, usually that service starts when the user fires up their machine, right? They log into Windows, Skype for Business fires up, right? And so there's a pretty good probability that those users will be accessible through Skype for Business. So if you go look through the employee directory, basically the address book within Skype, you can then usually contact those users or see if they're available or not. On the right-hand side, so Teams, you could send them instant messages. You can have those ad hoc sort of voice video calls, but not everybody's going to use Teams. And so you might be limited as to who you can contact quickly to have those conversations. I do think it's very good for the project room, daily active collaboration, where you've got people that are working together to solve a problem or to work on a project or to complete some sort of tasks. And for those folks that want to have those quick threaded discussions, the Teams thread discussion, it's a pretty good experience, right? And you're able to have a little bit of fun with it. It feels like it's not quite work. It's a fun, it feels more conversational than sort of robotic. Another thing too about Teams too is it gives you really quick access to those other resources you might need to complete that project work. Things like OneNote, Planner, and your documents, etc. And as mentioned before too, you can extend it, right? You can create things like tabs and bots and connect to other software as a service products. So, these are some of the, hopefully I'm hoping this is a helpful slide when you're trying to compare and contrast between Skype and Teams. And I'll pause for a second there. Does anyone have any feedback or questions on that?
Nothing yet. Nothing's in the window. We're chit-chatting on the app launcher, but you can keep going.
No. I'll keep going. Okay, so this is how to choose between SharePoint sites and O365 groups. And so I laugh that, sometimes people that are very familiar with SharePoint, they don't want to change. Give them a SharePoint site. They know how to use that. That'll work. More interesting though, and that's kind of I try to add a little humor. It doesn't come across when I'm doing a remote video presentation. But more importantly, if you need access to classic SharePoint pages, and that could be for branding scenarios, you're going to want to create a SharePoint team site, and you're going to want to create that through the SharePoint experience. So, like from the waffle or the app launcher, you click on SharePoint, you create your site, your SharePoint site there. That creates a SharePoint site collection, and that gives you access to the classic pages. And so, that could be, and I'm going to actually skip over the communication sites for templates for a second, but if you're going to still do SharePoint designer workflows, like, business process management type scenarios, you're going to want to create a SharePoint site. Any heavily developed custom applications, like a lot of client-side code, you'll want to create a SharePoint team site for that, SharePoint site collection. And then finally, some of these new communication site templates. So, a lot of consultants have made a good living making SharePoint not look like SharePoint. I know Tom's paid for his mortgage for the past 10 years on just doing just that, right? And so if that's a scenario for you, maybe you're building an employee intranet, a portal, any of those heavily customized experiences that have to reflect the company's brand, you're going to want to create a classic SharePoint site collection, and that's kind of how that's your path forward. On the O365 groups is if you're trying to create something that's email enabled, that's a great use case for that. The fact that you can easily access those sort of project resources, OneNotes, planners, files, all that, it's a really good interface for that. Another use case too that I like is if you're in Outlook a lot, and that could be their OWA, or if you've got, I think it's Outlook. Do you think you need Outlook 20, at least 2013? Don't quote me on that. Maybe you need 2016, but groups actually will show up within the Outlook client. It definitely shows up within the mobile app, and that allows you to quickly hop. If you're a member of a lot of different groups, you can quickly hop across those and access the conversation, the files, any resources tied to those groups. Also allows you to do sort of that opt-in. You can browse any of the public groups and see if there's an area that you might want to participate in. Or also O365 groups are very good for if you have scenarios where you need to extend those your requirements and pull in RSS feeds or to actually access other services, right? And so that's a good set of good use cases for O365 groups. Is this out of order? Let me double check. More. All right. So actually, I'm going to pause for a second. So, because I thought I got to it, and maybe I didn't. I had one of those days myself. So, the groups versus the teams. And so, the guidance that I've been giving people, and I don't know whether this is right or wrong, is it's really coming down to, if you need the persistent chat interface, if you need the ability from within an application to quickly spin up a voice or video conversation, Teams will work. That's a pretty good use case. Clearly, that's where Microsoft is investing a lot of money and time to make that a really rich collaboration experience. If your users are not quite there yet, O365 Groups is probably a good starting point. In fact, if you look at this sort of my collaboration journey, and this is kind of my guidance to organizations, is starting with SharePoint, getting people familiar with getting files off of their desktop, putting it in a central location, send links to files versus sending people the actual attachment is a great first step to sort of working more productively. From there, getting comfortable with having your files that are on your local machine sync up to a place in your OneDrive, having that working process, right? Giving that sort of that scratch space where you're able to sort of chew on different ideas and come up with new content, and not fear that people are going to either A, judge you because it's kind of half-baked at this point, or B, maybe you're just not quite ready to get people's input, because sometimes people give input when it's not quite solicited. OneDrive is kind of that next stepping stone where people can then feel comfortable about, making sure that those files are out and available to others. Next, from OneDrive, I try to recommend folks go to groups, because it's a little bit of the SharePoint, but it also allows you to extend, again, as I said, to other services. It gives you that conversation view. It allows you to, it's in my mind, it's sort of that next generation of what kind of that SharePoint team site, and I think it meets a lot of the use cases that I've seen for folks that are doing lightweight project management. People that are working within a department, etc. So, and then finally, when you're off and flying and working, as Microsoft wants you to work, Teams is definitely, if it fits the use case, if it's something that your people are, your users are interested in, if they've tried it out and they've bought into it as being, a solution to their business problem, I think it works pretty well. We're starting to see within our own organization a greater adoption of Teams because people like that sort of more casual conversation. It helps you build relationships with people in different departments, different markets, different states and countries. And so that's just kind of my view of things. And so I will pause again so I can take a sip of water and ask the person that was kind of asking between groups and teams, was that helpful? That little tangent, was that helpful at all? And if not, you can definitely tell me that as well.
I do have a question while you're taking a drink. So you're working at Slalom. I'm just curious, you're using Teams and O365 groups? Are you using them for two different things? Or like how is there a differentiation between like, oh, we're going to use Teams for this and then we're going to use Office 365 groups for this? I mean,
that's a great question. So for us at Slalom, we're using, and again, my job is consulting, so I hop from project to project to project. We're using groups and teams both for projects. And it's really sort of that norming with the team in the beginning to figure out what's the interface people want to use. If we're just going to be dumping files, maybe a group makes sense. If we're going to really have conversations, and people want to have many people weigh in on it and have it be text-based, have that persistent chat. Teams is is kind of where we're leaning towards. And then sometimes it's just, one group, if there's someone just creates the team and then tells people that's what we're going to do. That's been the other way of adopting it. But, like strategically, we are trying to get everyone into teams because, again, reading the tea leaves, looking at where Microsoft is spending the money, I think that they're going to continue to add new features and functions that's going to then sort of drive us to want to use Teams. So hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, just kind of wanted to get a feeling, for example, so people can kind of compare.
Yeah, and actually, the more I think about it too, is we were using groups, and then all of a sudden Teams came out, and there's been that was really when we had the shift. Because before it was like, wow, groups is cool. Like it gives us kind of create a group, you get everything you need. You get your planner, you get your OneNote. I mean, these are all the common things that you need to manage projects. And Teams kind of gave you that plus the persistent chat. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. And kind of talking about aligning with Microsoft's vision. So, I think it's no surprise that they are trying to work towards a unified experience across different services. Behind the scenes, SharePoint is powering a lot of this stuff. Groups and teams, that's where the files are being stored. I said before, Teams is definitely that shiny new object that's money adoption, and I would say engineering effort is being put behind Teams, which just, again, it's definitely, if you're an O365 consumer, going where Microsoft is investing can only mean that you're going to get a better experience. The weird reason why I'm going to pause and then contradict myself is that I've been a very anti-Yammer person for a while. I tend to not like it, and yet I've heard, and it was mentioned by Chris McNulty at SharePoint Saturday London. I have since seen a lot of Twitter activity by Microsoft O365 sort of the top tier people. I think folks like Mark Cashman and Dan Holm that have hinted at that the announcements next week at Ignite are going to be heavily that the Yammer roadmap is going to be very interesting for people, and so I think that aligns with Chris's comment about that being an investment area. So I would say stay tuned to next week's announcements, and let's see what's coming. So business use cases, I think this is the fun part. So hopefully it's not too repetitive. But some good O365 groups use cases. Hopefully I've said this a couple times now, those project management or project execution sites. It's a good use case. You can, it definitely gives you a lot of features and functions that are common across those workloads. I've also seen folks create department sites. So for example, I've seen a finance department create an O365 group. That's where they share their internally facing files and content. And then when they want to publish things like, what's the schedule for, issuing out invoices or any of the, month-end, quarter-end freezes or any of those, how do you do an intercompany accounting advice or any of that type of stuff, they would then publish that out to a SharePoint publishing site, for lack of a better word, but an enterprise content site. So again, the content sort of gets developed in their group, and then they actually sort of put it out on their portal site for people to consume. So a couple of quick O365 use cases. Again, I want to just sort of highlight the fact that if you're using that for project execution, you can integrate those third-party services. This is just kind of blown up a little bit more, and I love the fact that I was able to create issues in Bitbucket, have that show up within the conversation stream, so that the project manager could see that the bug was submitted, and then folks could actually, if they have access to Bitbucket, they can click it and view it. You got a comment, or you can just like it and stuff like that in the conversation. And then likewise too, so this was that same project we did. We were managing our tasks within Planner, and so I kind of filtered out some of that stuff, but it's just sort of that Kanban board, sort of like Trello, where you're able to create tasks and then move it across as to do and process done. You define the buckets that make sense for your project, and you can quickly move those around. That's pretty good for that sort of lightweight project management. I'd say more complicated projects, with hundreds of thousands of tasks, activities, those probably make more sense to be managed in, Microsoft Project File or, Project Online. But, for something like this, a little bit more lightweight, a little more agile, where you're delivering, value every week or every 2 weeks, Planner's a pretty good fit for those use cases. I didn't go too much. Yeah, cool. So really just a quick use case for OneDrive, and I said before, is that kind of managing that work-in process, content that might not belong in a site or in a group, or, if you want to be able to synchronize and sort of, cloud backup, right, for lack of a better term, synchronize between your local machine and that OneDrive for business service so that you can access it, from within the client, or you can go within the web view or within the mobile app to see those files. You could, if you wanted to collaborate with internal and external users, recognize that monitoring that and those complicated ACLs that your business users could set up can make it very complicated. They can also accidentally share files to everyone. So you might have to look at what monitoring solutions are available to prohibit people from, sharing sensitive information with the entire organization. That's probably not preferable for companies that have, data that's sensitive. But you can also, share those, the copy to those O365 groups where it makes sense. So again, really, if you break down the OneDrive business use case, for me, it's really that working process. That's kind of the sweet spot for OneDrive, and being able to keep your files synchronized across your iPads, your Surface Pros, your MacBook Pros, or any of those other devices that you have, and that way you can be productive no matter where you are, no matter what device you're using. So some Teams use cases. So again, I've probably just beat this horse to death, but project management, execution sites, we're using this quite a bit for managing our own projects. If your company is talking about going agile, Teams might be something where you want to align a POC of to a project that's being run, in agile, and then figure out, does that help, hurt, or neither that particular, initiative. In reality, I'm seeing a lot of lightweight, agile, called agile light projects. Teams, it works pretty good, and people like those conversations, and you can do sort of that planning poker to figure out how complicated a user story is. You can manage the Kanban board from pretty quickly access it from your teams. So it's kind of cool. And again, for me, who's kind of into the chatbots, you can actually build those and add those to your teams, and then you can go ahead and interact and have kind of interesting experiences with those. Now, another use case, and this kind of steps a little bit on Yammer's toes, is we're actually starting to see sort of those groups that and I'm going to call them sort of R&D groups, people that like to read about things and share them with others. Hey, here's a really good article about machine learning. Go check it out. And that's applicable to the insurance industry. Or, oh, hey, Microsoft is releasing an update to the bot framework that includes these capabilities. We should really look at that for X or Y project. I'm starting to see small pockets of that type of sort of that working group, working R&D group, sharing that knowledge or sharing articles or having those, having kind of that type of collaboration happen within teams. I'm starting to see it sort of sprout up in a couple different areas, both within my own company and also it's being kicked around in a couple of my clients that I've been talking to. I've actually just sort of give a quick little screenshot of something that's happening within Slalom. Is we've got a team set up for it's the AI community, and so they've decided to use Teams to sort of share those articles. I had to sort of filter out a lot of content because we were sharing some proprietary info. But you can just see people sharing some articles about, chatbot conversational design. And it's funny, sometimes it could be the topic that lends itself for Teams being a solution. It could be the people associated with it, their generational preference for collaborating, or it could be just, this, some people think that this is a good way of sharing that info. So I thought it was interesting. That's why I wanted to share it. Is something that I'm starting to see spread up without anyone really forcing that upon users. So Yammer, right? This is the one. So I make fun of Yammer, and I've probably got the most use cases for it. So a couple so here's a couple of them. One is innovation sites, and so this is where you can submit your ideas, things that you can, here's a hey, we might be able to solve X, Y, or Z problem with doing this, right? And so we're seeing this sort of crowdsourcing of ideas to go ahead and to bubble that up and have people vote on them and whatnot. sorry, I'm like having like someone texting me like constantly. You also have threaded conversations around those innovation sites, and so like so people can upvote them, they can like it, they can say this is good, this is bad, etc. There's also like SME or expertise search. You can find this. Yammer is a good use case for finding people that might be experts in a particular field. Who are your senior engineers? Who are your folks that that know a lot about claims processing? Whatever is applicable to your industry. I've seen with the right amount of governance and the right amount of adoption is people are able to go ahead and perform that expertise search within Yammer, assuming that properties are filled out and that that the groups are set up to learning areas are set up that people could connect with to find those experts. And again, and then knowledge management is the other thing, and I don't want to drill into that too much, but again, with the right amount of adoption, caring, feeding, and whatnot, that's been another use case for Yammer, is being able to share info with a lot of people, or being able to capture that tribal knowledge and put it in an area where people are able to go reference that later on. A couple of really other quick ones is a lot of companies have a sort of the new hire, newbie group area, and I've seen them use that as sort of that casual place that people can go to ask a question, not feel uncomfortable asking, and getting help from people with things like, how do I submit my time? How do I put in an expense report? How do I do this? How do I do that? Where you might consider that to be an HR function, but that's just something with HR departments being outsourced every day, and some of those questions ending up in overseas or with third parties, a place that you can go and people can sort of can ask questions, get it answered, and then recognize people that are contributing to make that successful. Communities of practice, and so we do more than just technology consulting. We are involved in a lot of sort of transformation, going from waterfall shops to agile. Agile is kind of the hot new way of doing project management. And so we've seen people set up, or we've recommended people set up also these communities of practices. And so Yammer's pretty good at that. If there's a large group of people that want to share information and they don't require an immediate response back, the communities of practice are pretty good for that. Like, hey, I had success doing X, Y, and Z on my particular project. This is what I did to make it successful. That's a decent use case for Yammer. Also, like research and development groups, maybe perhaps kind of similar to what I showed off with Microsoft Teams. You might have to worry about data security, make sure that those groups are not open up to everybody, but that could be a different area where people could go ahead and share that information out, like or collaborate, on upcoming products and services, etc. So classic SharePoint business use cases. So, again, I wanted to go ahead and highlight I'm highlighting classic. So that's their sort of traditional team site. And so, those would be scenarios where you're going to do, branding, right? So, intranets, departmental sites, brochureware, right? Those are some classic examples of branding. There's also, you can consider, search-based applications. And so, I use search quite a bit for rolling up large amounts of data. People have worried about that 5,000 item limit, and not being able to overcome that with, list view web parts or with JavaScript. So search allows you to overcome that 5,000 item limit. You are able to return back hundreds of thousands of items. I've got a blog post where I pull back 30,000 items and it comes back in less than a half second. There is no modern content search web part yet, and so if you're building out, an application on top of SharePoint or some sort of reporting on top of SharePoint, the classic SharePoint site, that's going to be the use case for that. Along with, as I think I mentioned before, is for any of these business process apps. So if you're building out SharePoint 2013 workflows, you can't connect to groups with SharePoint Designer. You might say, oh, we'll use Microsoft Flow, and so Flow is fantastic for data orchestration. I would say that, moving data between systems like SharePoint and Salesforce and all that. Unfortunately, I don't see the complete feature parity between Flow and SharePoint Designer workflows. You also, from a pricing perspective, will pay more for Flow than you do for SharePoint Designer. Those workflows are just part of the service, whereas you pay per flow. So based on the how often those run, you have to consult with your licensing expert to figure out if that makes sense or not, along with the feature parity of those SharePoint classic of the SharePoint workflows. So I want to quickly also mention where collaboration goes bad. That's the Twitter fail whale. I think it's kind of cute. So this is what happens when someone says we're going to do this, and they don't get people to buy in, and they don't do caring and feeding of it to make it successful. I'm picking on our Boston team. They said that the Boston portals and collaboration, all of it was going to be within Yammer. They were going to use a Yammer group. That's where we're going to have conversations and share documents, best practice, and all this stuff. And I took this screenshot like a month ago. This group has not been updated since May 4th, 2016. And so we're well beyond a year. Honestly, that's just, you don't have buy-in, you don't have people that are saying this is going to solve our problem. It gets abandoned. It's not solving the problem. It's not the right tool for the job. So, again, just a quick kind of not doing it right. So some generational preferences for collaboration. So I stole this from, when did I steal it from? This was Ignite Australia last year. So there were some surveys that were done by some really smart people. I think there was an E&Y case study that was developed. And so this is generational preferences at work for different types of things, and it's kind of interesting too. If you look, so baby boomers and Generation Z, or Z, depending on where you're from, they actually prefer in-person meetings, which is not, and millennials are sort of half and half, which might not fit the stereotype of what you think about Generation Z. And so I think a couple of things, I don't want to, look at, I'm not going to go line by line, but, some couple things to think about is, first off, you can't generalize an entire generation on how the preferences are. But if you should sort of be aware of that, and should sort of be aware that, if you're trying to push Microsoft Teams, which has a pretty heavy persistent chat feature functionality to it, and you are largely dealing with baby boomers and Generation X, they might be not find that as something they prefer for working. They might not enjoy that, and so they might be more resistant to that change than perhaps your millennials or your Generation Z. And so I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I'll make these slides available actually right after this meeting, so if you want to go ahead and take a look at this and view more. And I think if I don't include the links to the studies, I'll make sure that those are available as well. So we can provide you some additional context of sort of what's behind these results. And so for driving adoption, and so I think I've said it a few times, and I push it because I think it's important. I think as IT pros, we like to solve problems, but I think that one of the skills that we tend to lack is really solving the business problems, and not just sort of oversimplifying or generalizing what people's problems are. A thing that I really like to do if I have the opportunity is to get people in a room where they're like, all right, we want to collaborate, we want to improve collaboration amongst our team, and get them to actually participate in a whiteboarding session where you identify the pain points, and having people stand up with a dry a whiteboard and actually write stuff down. You get some pretty good engagement. People like that. Some reason people like they like standing up, they like writing, they like being part of it, and so getting a team to go and do that is pretty good. You also want to figure out through that session how are people motivated? What's going to make their lives easier? If you got someone that's doing this task that takes hours and hours and hours. They might be motivated to make that easier, reduce the steps and reduce their workload. Also like to definitely facilitate a working session. So one of the cool things that you can do is spin up a quick test team or test group and have people try it out. And the thing that tends to get folks hooked in that this technology could solve a problem is showing off document co-authoring. That's a very underrated feature that perhaps didn't work so well in previous versions of the products. The current versions are a whole lot better. And so showing people real time within like a PowerPoint and making changes and getting the updates, that definitely can help build some sort of trust that this will solve their problem. And so another thing too is just, as I said before, is, just because you pick something doesn't mean that's what you're stuck with. So being able to pivot to try something else is totally feasible if things aren't working out. The other thing too is if you're in the midst of rolling out O365 to your organization, think about how you can leverage the O365 capabilities to better drive your adoption. So this is a real classic example, and it's kind of a dumbed down, but this is a new SharePoint communication site, and I've got a couple blog posts that talk about it. Is use this to help drive adoption. Feature areas where people are successful with the technology, that they're able to post articles and they're able to show off things to how the technology is working for them. Host your brown bags, your lunches, your webinars, and all that from this communication site. Just leverage, let the technology, let the tools help you with solving that adoption problem. Instead of having to spend a ton of money branding a portal for adoption, this modern communication site looks nice, right? It's got the cool hero web part. You can spotlight different content, put these nice rich images. It kind of looks a little bit like SharePoint, but in some ways it's not as ugly as those three people collaborating around a laptop from SharePoint 2010. The other thing too, and I like to call is like next gen knowledge management. So, for answering those questions like, hey, how do I get hooked up with this? Or how do I request a site? Or how do I get help? Or all these things. I showed two different examples, right? You can have a Yammer group, which you embed within that modern site, or you could have a persistent chat window with like a chatbot. Like so, I've got a session I'm going to do at the Collab 365 where I show you how to build a chatbot, with the bot framework, and how it can do Q&A. So you can ask the bot questions and can give you answers. Things like, what is Microsoft Teams, and how can Teams help me, and how do I request a team, and how do I, and have it kind of give your users back those answers, and monitor the questions that the bot gets asked, and then be able to respond back with as appropriate. So I'm just challenging people that are out there trying to push this technology to look for ways that to again leverage the tools to help solve the problems, to help better drive adoption. And then finally, along those lines, the days of classroom training, 8 hours in a room where someone's lecturing to people is over. The attention span's not there. You retain so little of what you understand, of what you hear. There's definitely a pivot towards what's called lean learning, and so it's really those 3 to 7 minute long videos that show you how to solve something. If you either can buy those from a third party, there's definitely services that offer that, or you can build, kind of spin up your own, right? And have users submit their own little 3 to 7 minutes and gives them, perhaps gamify and reward people for submitting videos for how to do things and provide them things like Starbucks gift cards, right? There's no better blocker to getting stuff done than giving out some Starbucks gift cards for sure. And then finally, just kind of wrapping things up, is a couple of resources to learn more. So there's Matt Wade's blog. He's the guy with those great, crazy infographics. Definitely hit him up. Joanna Klein, she's one of my favorite bloggers right now, putting out tons of content. If you're looking at in the O365 space and thinking about things like governance and data protection, Joanna's got some really awesome blog posts. My blog, of course, is the best of all time. If you want to learn a little bit more about those those communication sites, I'd record a 15-minute video. You can go check that out on YouTube. There's a slightly dated to-to-lead white paper that was put out with when to use what. It doesn't have some of the newer technology. I was talking to the folks up at to-to-lead. They were asking me if I'd want to participate and help them update that document. I said no. If I had time to write that, I would, which I don't. It would be fun, but I don't know, writing a white paper is not always what's cracked up to be. So, but you can always check it out and see what they were talking about last year. Definitely things have changed quite a bit. And then finally, if you are managing O365 as a service, there's a product roadmap. Again, there's a lot of content, a lot of stuff that's being changed, and it's a little hard to follow, but if you're going to want to try to get any sort of sanity in your arms around what's coming next, definitely have the O365 roadmap. So with that, that is all that I have, and I will pause for questions, comments, concerns, etc.
Yeah, Jared, I have a question for you. In terms of findability, if you're trying, say you dump all your content in groups or you go to Teams, What is the search experience like? What, is it easier to find stuff in one versus the other, or is there not a search experience? Like,
Yeah, yeah. So, what's my good answer on that? So, so
it's kind of a tough question too, but there's, to try to find stuff, if you commit yourself into one or the other, then
so
yeah.
what? So here's what I'm finding myself doing more, and I don't know if it's by Microsoft design or it's based on the fact that it's helpful. Is I'm usually going to my profile page, right, my Delve profile, and from there I have pretty quick access to stuff that either I'm working on, or since I manage 7 people now, I click on any one of those folks to find that content. That's been what I've done. So it's a lot of that content being sort of surfaced up to me is how I'm getting that. The other thing too, and I don't know, again, I'm really talking to how I work. I'm editing, if I'm working on a bunch of different PowerPoints, for example, PowerPoint manages those recent files, and if you're on the newer version of Outlook, and a lot of times, I mean, when I know I need something is when I need to send it to someone. That's usually the kind of the trigger that I need to, where is that thing, right? If I've recently edited it, it shows up within PowerPoint. If you go to add an attachment, it'll find those recently modified files. So I definitely didn't answer your question very well. I would say though that it is definitely a departure from what I've been doing for my clients for like the past few years before. Well, my main focus before was like everything was in SharePoint. You build them an enterprise search center. You go ahead, have them, create metadata. You apply that, create custom search scopes and custom refiners, and that's how they find content. And like for this sort of the information management stuff, like that's not the right word I'm looking for, but like the unstructured data, right? The PowerPoints, the Word docs, the Excel files, like I'm finding myself going to delve more to find those, or from within the client apps themselves. When I have to search across, I also do that from the Delve profile. So
Yeah, that's interesting, because ultimately that will search across everything, right, in your organization.
right.
So it's a good point. Bob Fox was saying that the search for Teams is not so great, and that we should go to user voice and put that in there and promote it, saying get better search in there.
Yeah, Bob. Actually, so that's the thing too. Like, I'm glad someone brought that up. And a lot of times I skip over that. So, I made kind of the comment, the fact that that Teams is an area where Microsoft is investing a lot of time, a lot of money. So Bob has a really and they're very active on user voice. So Bob's recognition is actually really good because not only, and I'm not gonna click. So it's very easy to say, oh yeah, you have a suggestion, go put on user voice. I have seen the activity that I have seen that the Teams group is, curating that content and responding to it and providing with like approximate, dates for when that might come through has been awesome. That is a completely different Microsoft than what I've ever seen in my working career. And so that is legit feedback. If there's something within Teams that you think would make it better, and I think the one, I don't remember if I submitted it or not, but I did ask for more granular permissions at the channel level within Teams. I gotta go double check see where that's at, but yeah, that's a great suggestion. And the product team is actively monitoring it, and there's a good chance that you're gonna see that added to the product in the next few weeks or months. So I appreciate you, Bob, saying that.
Just another quick question about, let's go back 1 second. So with groups and team sites, do they have managed metadata? So the sites that are created through groups and the sites that are created through teams, are they full SharePoint sites and they have managed metadata, or is there something special about them?
That's a good question. I could have sworn, I don't know. I want to pull it up. I could have sworn that they do have managed metadata scoped at them. It's funny because I think since going to them, I haven't created columns that are hooked up to managed metadata. I've only done sort of site columns. I have to go look. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know a safe one. Yeah,
Yeah,
so I don't know a safe site to bring up in front of everybody.
yeah. Don't. You can just let us know. We'll
Yeah,
follow up with that question.
yeah, it's a great question though.
All right. So are there any other questions out there? Now's the time to ask. Let's see. Doesn't look like anything. Well, Jared, first of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to meet with us and present. We're gonna post a wrap up online, right? We'll get your slides, and then we'll have the video in a couple days. I'll be post that to the YouTube channel.
Cool. Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me. I appreciate you with my sort of fast tempo. I'm very used to playing off the crowd a little bit, and I had a little crisis blowing up on my phone. So perfect start of fun. So I really appreciate everyone sticking in with me. If you want to hit me up after the fact, I'm on Twitter at Jared Matfess, or if you got my email address, definitely give me a shout. I love to talk. If you want to just bounce some ideas off me, again, I'm happy to engage. That's why I love being part of this community. So appreciate your time on this Wednesday evening, and I look forward to collaborating with you in the future.
Well, yep, you're one day ahead. It's Tuesday, so
Oh,
you just gained a day. Yeah, thanks everybody. We'll be following up when I get back from Ignite. We'll do a wrap up on that. So stay tuned, check out the meetup site, and we'll see you next time.
cool. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks everybody. Bye.